All right, strap in, everyone, because this deep dive, well, this one is a doozy. We're going to tackle a question that sparked debate for centuries.
Oh, yeah, this is a big one.
Why did most Jewish people not accept Jesus as the Messiah? And even more interesting, we'll explore why this ancient question still matters today.
It's a question that goes right to the heart of the relationship between two of the world's biggest religions, Christianity and Judaism.
We're going to need a good mix of history, theology, and a whole lot of open-mindedness to really get this.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so our main source material today comes from a YouTube video by Deep Bible Stories.
Those guys are always digging into those fascinating, sometimes hidden parts of Scripture.
They call them hidden truths and powerful insights. And for the record, they're approaching this from a Christian perspective.
Right.
But just a reminder, folks, we are not here to pick sides.
Not at all.
We're on a mission to understand, why does this divide exist in the first place?
Exactly. And to do that, we got to rewind a bit. Right. We need to understand what it really meant to be Jewish back then.
Okay, so back in the day,
it's not just a label, you see. Jewish identity. It's deeply tied to their covenant with God. Think back to Abraham, the OG, the founding father.
Oh, Abraham.
Leaves everything behind, his whole life based on a promise from God. His descendants, they'd become a great nation.
A nation with a purpose.
That's where this idea of the Jewish people being chosen comes from. Now, this doesn't mean special treatment.
Oh, I see.
It's about responsibility, chosen to be a light to the world.
So it's like their spiritual mission statement. It guides how they see themselves, the world around them.
You got it. And the sense of purpose, this chosenness, it gets reinforced through major events. Like, think about the Exodus.
Moses leading the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt.
Boom. Suddenly, the idea of a chosen people bound to God, solidified. It's all about this sacred agreement, a covenant.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got this covenant. But it's more than just an idea, right? It had real impact on their lives.
Absolutely. It wasn't some vague agreement, this covenant. It was lived out through a system, laws, rituals, the whole 9 yards, all found in the Torah.
Oh, the Torah, like their guidebook.
Think of it like a blueprint for living in alignment with God's will. Every commandment, every ritual, they were all ways to show their unique relationship with God, setting them apart in a world full of, well, all sorts of gods and beliefs.
Not just following the rules, but expressing their identity as a people.
Exactly. Now, hold on, because this next part is key. Woven into all this is the anticipation, the waiting for a Messiah.
A Messiah.
A future leader promised by the prophets. Now, some prophecies, like those in Isaiah, they describe a suffering servant, someone who takes on the sins of the people.
Interesting.
But then you have others, like in the book of Daniel. They depict a powerful king coming to restore Israel to its former glory.
So 2 different images of the Messiah.
You got it. Centuries of history. Deep sense of identity, and this burning hope for Messiah.
And then enter stage left.
Jesus.
Right at that moment, what happens?
And things get really, really interesting because Jesus arrives preaching a kingdom. But here's the thing, it's not of this world.
Not of this world.
He's talking about love, loving your enemies even, focusing on internal change, a spiritual kind of kingdom. And this message, well, it didn't line up with the popular expectation, you know, the one for a warrior king, someone to kick out those Romans and make Israel a political force again.
Yeah, I can imagine the reaction.
Oh, yeah, the video even highlights that moment in John, where Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world." It's like the mic drop moment.
Definitely not what people were expecting.
It's a complete 180. The Jewish people, they're yearning for freedom, someone to break the chains of Roman oppression. And Jesus is talking about love and a kingdom that isn't about earthly power.
It sounds like it was more than just unmet expectations. Like, the video talks about how some people saw Jesus as a threat.
Oh, absolutely. Especially the religious authorities, like the Pharisees, Sadducees. They had their system, you know. They were all about interpreting the law, maintaining this delicate peace with the Romans. Order. Everything was about order.
And Jesus was a wrench in the gears.
Right. He challenges their interpretations of the law, questions their authority, heals people on the Sabbath, which to them was a big no-no. But you know what might have been the most shocking thing?
What's that?
His claims. They challenged this fundamental idea, the idea of one God, which is, you know, kind of a big deal in Judaism.
Yeah, I can't get more central than that.
The video specifically mentions a statement. Jesus says, "Before Abraham was, I am."
I am. Those words have power.
You see, for Jewish leaders, this was huge. These words, they echo the name God used when revealing himself to Moses. sacred.
So they heard those words and...
It wasn't just a theological debate. It sounded like blasphemy, a direct challenge to the core of their faith.
Wow. And politically, I bet things were getting dicey too. Jesus was gaining popularity. And that message probably didn't sit well with the Romans.
Oh, you're right on the money. Jesus' message could have easily upset that fragile peace they had going on. And we even see the high priest, Caiaphas, expressing that fear.
What did he say?
He said, "It is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish." To him, Jesus was a risk, a national security risk.
So you've got all these factors colliding. Expectations, religious tension, political danger.
The recipe for a showdown.
Now, it's important to remember, right?
Yeah.
Not all Jewish people were on the same page about Jesus.
The video makes that clear. You had a whole spectrum of reactions.
Some people, they were all in, became devoted followers.
Others, complete rejection.
So it wasn't this simple us versus them situation.
Not at all. There were people from all walks of life drawn to Jesus. Fishermen, tax collectors, those who felt marginalized, seen and valued.
I guess his message resonated.
Oh, yeah. But at the same time, you had the religious elite. They saw Jesus as dangerous, a heretic.
And a threat to their power.
Exactly. To them, he was a threat to their authority, to the stability of their society.
Okay, so we have this divided Jewish community. But then there's a twist. Jesus' message, it starts spreading beyond the Jewish people.
This is where things get even more interesting. You have a Messiah sent to the Jewish people.
Yeah.
He ends up finding a larger following among the Gentiles, non-Jews. It's a paradox.
A real head-scratcher. And the video dives into this paradox, right? It talks about the Apostle Paul and this idea of a partial hardening of Israel.
Yeah, Paul, in Romans, he suggests this hardening was temporary, a way to allow the Gentiles in, to be grafted into God's covenant, almost like adding a new branch to a family tree.
Okay, I can see that.
He even argues that it was Israel's rejection of Jesus that made it possible for Gentiles to find salvation.
That's a pretty big claim.
Bold, for sure. Like God using this rejection to spread his message to the world.
We've covered a lot of ground here. Jewish expectations of the Messiah, how those clashed with Jesus' message, the reactions from the Jewish community, and then this unexpected spread to the Gentiles.
And we're just getting started.
It feels like we've only scratched the surface. What happens next?
What does this historical rejection mean for Jewish-Christian relations today? Are there prophecies that hint at a future reconciliation? And what does it all mean for us? What are the implications of rejecting or accepting Jesus?
Good questions.
We'll dive into all of that next time.
Last time, we were talking about how Jesus' message, it kind of went global, spread to the Gentiles, those who weren't Jewish. And that raises some questions, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
A Messiah meant for the Jewish people, and he finds a bigger following outside that group.
It's a bit of a head-scratcher.
It is. Especially when you look at how Jewish and Christian communities, how they understand the whole Messiah thing, you know?
Right. You can't just assume everyone's reading from the same playbook.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like, take Isaiah 53, for example.
Okay, Isaiah 53.
Christians, they see it as this prophecy about the suffering servant. And they believe, of course, that was Jesus.
Makes sense from their perspective.
But then you talk to some Jewish scholars, and they interpret that same passage totally differently.
Oh, yeah. For them, it's about the suffering of Israel throughout history, not about one specific Messiah.
So, same text, different conclusions.
That's the thing about interpretation. It's tricky.
It is. And what about that prophecy in Daniel 9, the one where Christians see Jesus as the anointed one who's cut off?
Yeah. Interesting one.
How do Jewish communities understand that?
Well, their interpretations often connect it to other big events in their history. Things like maybe struggles during the Maccabean period or the destruction of the Second Temple.
So, like, their historical context changes the whole meaning.
Exactly. Context is key.
It's like we're putting together a puzzle, but the pieces fit differently depending on what picture you're trying to make.
That's a great way to put it. And these differences in interpretation, they go even deeper. We have to look at, like, the very nature of God. The Jewish belief in one God, and the Christian idea of the Trinity. Those are fundamentally different.
Yeah, because in Judaism, there's this huge emphasis on God's oneness.
Absolutely. It's central to their faith. The Shema, that central prayer in Judaism, it declares, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one."
It's like their core belief.
It is a cornerstone. So for a lot of Jewish people, accepting Jesus as divine, as part of a Trinity,
Doesn't compute.
It's just not compatible. It would require a huge shift in how they understand God.
And historically, hasn't that idea been used to pressure Jewish people to convert to Christianity?
Sadly, yes. It adds a whole other layer of complexity to the issue.
Because it's not just some abstract theological debate. This goes way deeper. It's about identity, history, even survival.
You said it. Centuries of anti-Semitism, often justified in the name of Christianity. It's understandable why that would shape Jewish perspectives on Jesus, on Christianity as a whole.
Yeah, I can see that. For many Jewish people, accepting Jesus might feel like a betrayal of everything they fought for.
It's a sensitive issue.
It is. So how do we even begin to bridge this divide? After all this history,
Yeah.
the video we're discussing, it seems to suggest that Gentile belief in Jesus, it doesn't erase or replace God's covenant with the Jewish people.
That's an important point. You know, in Romans, Paul uses this metaphor of the olive tree.
Go get the olive tree.
It represents God's covenant with Israel.
Oh,
And
cool.
Paul talks about Gentiles being grafted in.
Added to the tree.
Exactly. It's not about replacing the original branches, but adding new ones, like adding a new member to a family. It expands the family without erasing anyone's place in it.
It's not a replacement. More like growth.
Right. And Paul even hints that this Gentile inclusion, it could actually lead the Jewish people back to recognizing their Messiah, this idea of a future reconciliation.
That's interesting. So are there other biblical prophecies that hint at a future where the Jewish people might, recognize Jesus as the Messiah?
The video points to a few. One is Paul's statement in Romans 11.26, all Israel will be saved. Some Christians see that as a prophecy of a future event,
Where everyone comes together.
where the Jewish people as a whole come to faith in Jesus.
And what about prophecies from the Old Testament?
Yeah, the video brings up Ezekiel 36. God promises to give Israel a new heart and spirit. Some Christians see that as foreshadowing a spiritual renewal that comes through accepting Christ.
Okay, still a new beginning.
They also mention a prophecy from Zechariah, the one about Israel looking upon the one they pierced. It's often linked to Jesus' crucifixion.
So this idea of future restoration, of the Jewish people recognizing Jesus and experiencing this huge spiritual awakening, but with all the history we talked about, isn't that concept, I don't know, maybe a bit insensitive or even presumptuous?
You bring up a valid point. It's really crucial to approach this idea with sensitivity and to remember it's just one interpretation. It's not a guaranteed future event, and it doesn't take away from the validity of Jewish faith as it is today.
Okay, good point. So we've got this theological divide, these prophecies of future restoration. But now from a Christian perspective, what about the consequences of rejecting Jesus? The video seems to go right for that question.
It does. It lays out this core belief that Jesus is the only path to salvation. They even quote John 14.6, where Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
That's a powerful statement.
No doubt. It's the foundation of Christian beliefs about salvation. And they bring up Acts 4.12 too, where Peter tells Jewish leaders that salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved.
So basically, from a Christian viewpoint, rejecting Jesus has eternal consequences.
Right. But the video emphasizes that it's not about judging or condemning individuals.
It's about explaining a different worldview.
Precisely. A different understanding of how things work spiritually. It's not about saying you're wrong or anything like that.
More like, here's how we see it.
Exactly. And even within that worldview, there's room for nuance and hope. The video points to 2 Peter 3.9, where it says, God doesn't want anyone to perish. It's clear that God's covenant with Israel is unbreakable. So, the Jewish people, they still hold a special place in God's plan.
Okay, so we've explored the divide, these prophecies, and the Christian perspective on what it means to reject Jesus. What are we supposed to take away from all of this?
Big question, right? I think the video leaves us with more questions than answers. And that's okay. It's meant to spark thought, not give us a pat answer.
Makes you think. And this topic, it's so sensitive, it goes beyond just an academic discussion. It has real-world impact.
You're right. It affects how we understand and interact with each other.
So then, how do we even begin to move forward?
Well, I think it starts with humility, with respect, a genuine desire to understand different perspectives, even when those perspectives challenge our own beliefs.
It's so easy to just stay in our own echo chambers, surrounded by people who agree with us.
It is. But when we engage with different perspectives, especially on a sensitive topic like this, it makes us think harder. It makes us more compassionate.
So not about winning an argument or converting anyone?
Not at all. It's about listening, learning, Having respectful conversations, maybe even bridging some of those divides that have separated us for far too long.
All right, so we've dug pretty deep here. We talked about those historical reasons why Jewish people didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah
Mm.
and the theological differences that still kind of create a divide, plus those prophecies about a possible future reconciliation. But before we wrap up, there's this one thing nagging at me.
Oh, what's that?
How does this ancient history, how does it affect us today?
It's wild how this story, it's not just some ancient history, it's woven into so much. Interfaith dialogue, tolerance, even global politics.
Kind of unsettling to think about, right? Something from so long ago, and it's still having this ripple effect.
Definitely. And one of the biggest and saddest examples of that is how this idea of Jewish rejection of Jesus, it's been twisted, used to justify anti-Semitism for centuries.
That whole thing about the Jews killing Christ?
It's been used to demonize and persecute Jewish communities for way too long.
So messed up.
It is, and that's exactly why understanding the historical context is so important. This wasn't some simple black and white issue. There were so many different responses within the Jewish community back then.
They weren't a monolith.
Nope. And recognizing that complexity is essential to fight those harmful stereotypes that still exist today.
So it's about seeing Jewish identity and faith on their own terms, right? Not just defining them by their relationship to Jesus or Christianity.
Exactly. They have a rich tradition, a vibrant culture, and it deserves respect and understanding. And for Christians, remembering those shared roots, that can help create a more compassionate and respectful dialogue.
Almost like looking through a new lens.
Mhm.
Instead of rivals or enemies, we see each other as fellow travelers on a spiritual journey.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it goes beyond just interfaith stuff. It's about understanding history. The Jewish rejection of Jesus and the rise of Christianity, those events had a huge impact on Western civilization.
So it's not just a religious debate. It's about the roots of our societies, our cultures.
Think about it. These events, they influenced everything, from European culture and law to the rise of empires.
Wow. So much bigger than I ever imagined. But for the everyday person listening, what does it all mean? What can they take away from this whole discussion?
I think the most important thing is remembering to be humble, empathetic, willing to engage with those different perspectives, even when those perspectives challenge our own beliefs.
It's so easy to stay in our own little bubbles, surrounded by people who already agree with us.
It is, but stepping outside that bubble, engaging with something complex and sensitive like this, it makes us more thoughtful, more compassionate.
It's not about winning arguments or changing anyone's mind.
Right. It's about listening, learning, having those respectful conversations. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we start to bridge those divides that have kept us apart for far too long.
I like that. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to ponder. The video we've been discussing, it talks about this possible future reconciliation between the Jewish people and Jesus. Based on some interpretations of biblical prophecy, of course, it's definitely something to think about.
What would that even look like, a reconciliation like that? How would it affect Jewish-Christian relations, the future of these faiths, the whole world even?
Big questions, ones that deserve our attention and respect as we grapple with them. And who knows, maybe by having these kinds of conversations, these thoughtful, respectful dialogues, we can actually contribute to a more peaceful and understanding future. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. We hope you keep exploring these complex and important questions. Keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep the conversation going.